Sometimes fate has strange designs on the lives of mortal men. You think you're just a wholesale grocer one day, and the next, you have a front row seat to the largest domestic military conflict in American history. And that's exactly what happened to a man named Wilmer McLean, who holds the bizarre distinction of owning the property where the battle for our nation's soul took place, twice. So, today we're investigating how the Civil War started and ended at the same guy's house. But before we do that, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel and let us know in the comments what other bizarre coincidences you'd like to hear about. Okay, hope you're ready to think twice about home ownership, because here we go. Born May 3, 1814, Wilmer McLean worked as a wholesale grocer. Given his place in American history, we'd love to be able to tell you he was a standard bearer for contemporary ideals. But he was actually exceedingly pro-Confederate, like super-duper Confederate, a full-on slave owner who married a wealthy widow in 1853 and began running a sizable plantation. And by all estimates, McLean was a very successful dude. Of course, it didn't hurt that he married into a wealthy family, because that served as a backbone for many of his initial entrepreneurial efforts. But it is impressive that he managed to pull it off with his notably Lincoln-esque facial hair. Lincoln not being terribly popular in the South at the time, for whatever reason. Anyway, the property McLean owned was located in Prince William County, right behind the Potomac River in the Commonwealth of Virginia. That property featured a small moving body of water called the Bull Run Stream, which might sound familiar to anyone who took elementary school level history, as it was the site of the First Battle of Bull Run, the first major skirmish of the Civil War. In 1861, Confederate General P.G.T. Beauregard commandeered McLean's property as the headquarters of the Confederate troops. This sounds pretty aggressive, but back in those days, it was actually a fairly standard wartime practice on every side of the political spectrum. Historically speaking, there are countless stories of insurgent military operations setting up headquarters in the sizable homes of affluent individuals during various occupations or invasions. Every army does it, but the Confederates didn't exactly pick the McLean farm at random. In fact, they didn't pick it all. It was offered to them. According to General Beauregard, McLean provided the Confederacy with valuable intelligence about the area and even offered up the buildings on his farm to the Confederate troops. That included his home, as well as his barn, which was converted into a military hospital. Yes, thanks to his Confederate leanings, as well as the fact that he was a retired officer in the Virginia militia, McLean was ready, willing, and generally eager to help with the war effort. If he had been a younger man, he probably would have even re-enlisted. But unfortunately for him, he was 47 and too old to endure active duty again. It's also worth noting that by that point in his life, McLean had way too much to lose. Specifically, a wife, a plantation, and oodles of money that he had accrued speculating on sugar and other commodities. Nonetheless, he invited the Southern Army into his home, which immediately led to some hilarious sitcom-style hijinks. For example, on July 18, 1861, Beauregard was eating supper in the kitchen when a cannonball tore through the structure and landed squarely in the kitchen fireplace. You might not find that so funny, but Beauregard would record in his diary, "A comical effect of this artillery fight was the destruction of the dinner of myself and staff by a Federal shell that fell into the fireplace of my headquarters at the McLean house." Anyway, the initial battle of the Civil War would begin on McLean's farm just 3 days later, on July 21, 1861. As we alluded to before, it was called the First Battle of Bull Run, or alternatively, the Battle of First Manassas. That being said, we respectfully request that you hold your man-asses jokes until the end. Whatever you want to call it, the battle was notable because it set a pretty dark tone for the prospective war. Beauregard led the Confederate forces, and Brigadier General Irvin McDowell led the Union forces. Each side had about 18,000 troops, and neither had quite mastered the art of, well, organizing them. In any way. At all, really. Accounts of the battle characterize it as brutal, sloppy, and almost comically disorganized. Long story short, the Confederates won, and the Union forces retreated after their defeat. The Union forces weren't the only ones to flee McLean's farm. McLean and his family had fled right before the battle started. You know, so as to not get killed. But after the Confederacy victory, they decided to return. Surveying the carnage, McLean was recommitted to his cause. He helped house the Confederate wounded in his barn. And after sorting out some internal conflict, he worked to bring in wounded Union soldiers as well. Starting around this time, McLean began working for the Confederate quartermaster. That means he would sell the Confederates the food and supplies that the war effort demanded. However, as time passed, McLean, ever the businessman, started to charge them more and more. He brokered sugar and other essentials and managed to make quite a pretty penny off the whole deal. One sergeant even complained on the record about the very exorbitant prices at Manassas. As if one major Civil War battle in his front yard wasn't enough, the Second Battle of Bull Run was fought from August 28th through August 30th, 1862, and it happened in pretty much the same place. Only this battle was much bigger than the first. This time, the big guns showed up, both literally and metaphorically. Over 77,000 soldiers fought for the North and roughly 50,000 for the South, and the generals in charge were John Pope and Robert E. Lee. The Confederates, assisted by multiple strategic moments of brilliance by Stonewall Jackson, won again. Over 15,000 Union troops perished or went missing during the battle. Given his Confederate leanings, you'd think McLean would be delighted, but not so much. In fact, he had had enough. And despite how much money he was making off the whole thing, he packed up his pregnant wife and got the hell out of there, for good. In the spring of 1863, McLean uprooted his whole life and set out in pursuit of greener and decidedly less blood-soaked pastures. To that end, he moved his family approximately 120 miles south to Appomattox County, Virginia, where they settled near a community called the Appomattox Courthouse. McLean later told a friend that he left Manassas with the hope that he'd never see another soldier again. That, however, would not be the case for him. Far from it. McLean had 2 good years in Appomattox, but on April 9, 1865, an aide to General Lee arrived at his property. He asked McLean what might be a good meeting spot for Lee and another general, and McLean, who probably just wanted to get that guy the hell out of there, suggested a dilapidated house nearby. But the marshal didn't like it. He was concerned over safety risks, so McLean reluctantly offered his own home as a meeting spot. On the appointed day, Lee, looking clean and spiffy, met Ulysses Grant, who was decidedly less spiffy, being covered in mud and looking fairly beleaguered. It's an interesting sign of the weird dynamic at play. Lee wanted to go out with honor, whereas Grant just wanted that shit to be over. The two generals chewed the fat in McLean's parlor for 20 minutes or so, and then, with the obligatory chit-chat out of the way, Lee finally brought up the topic of the meeting, the Confederate surrender. After that, it only took a few minutes for the Civil War to officially be over, and, spoiler alert, the South lost. But they weren't the only losers that day. Apparently, soldiers looking for souvenirs of the occasion cleaned out the McLean house. According to contemporary reports, one a-hole even took his little girl's doll. After the war ended, the McLeans found themselves unable to keep up with their mortgage payments, so they sold their house in Appomattox and returned to Manassas. They weren't happy there either, though, so then they moved to Alexandria, Virginia, where McLean worked for the IRS from 1873 to 1876. He died in Alexandria in 1882 and is buried at St. Paul's Episcopal Cemetery, in case you want to visit or something. Fast forward to today, and the arc of history has nearly completely forgotten McLean's name. Nevertheless, he was a linchpin spectator in the course of our country. He was a witness to the beginning and the end of the greatest military conflict to ever take place on American soil. He provided infrastructure, assistance, and grew fat off the conflict. He also saw the carnage up close, and it deeply affected him. The fact that the Civil War opened and closed on homes owned by Wilmer McLean, by complete coincidence, is nothing short of bizarre. Heck, it would be a strange factoid even if McLean wasn't desperately attempting to flee the impact of the war when he moved to Appomattox. But he was, and he failed. Because apparently, fate is a bitch, and we can't outrun our past, no matter how hard we try. But the point is, Wilmer McLean was a man defined by the chaos of his times. He profited off it, he accelerated it, and didn't even try to rebel against the demons that appeared at his doorstep. And therein lies the real lessons of this story. First, don't attempt to turn a blind eye to the horrors committed in your front yard, so to speak. They will catch up to you, either literally or metaphorically, or both. And second, never offer your farm to the Confederate Army to use as a headquarters, or to two Civil War generals looking for a meeting spot, or you'll die working for the IRS in Virginia. Oh, you laugh, but it could happen to you as easily as it did to Wilmer McLean. So what do you think? And what would you have done if you were in Wilmer McLean's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, please like and subscribe for more videos from our weird history.